The wooden bleachers groaned under the weight of ranchers and traders packed shoulder to shoulder in the Ridgewood Livestock Auction barn. September wind rattled the tin roof, carrying with it the scent of hay and cattle from the pens outside. Dust particles danced through shafts of afternoon light that cut across the arena floor, illuminating the center ring where fortunes changed hands with the strike of a gavel. The auctioneer's voice boomed through the crackling speakers, rapid-fire numbers blending with the shuffle of boots and the occasional lowing of cattle waiting their turn. This was a place where value was measured in muscle and bone, where animals were commodities and sentiment had no currency. When the short-legged mare stumbled into the ring, dragging her malformed hind legs like anchors through the dirt, the laughter started as a ripple and grew into a wave that crashed against the rafters. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The mare's coat was a patchwork of muddy brown and white, her mane tangled with burrs and straw. But it was her legs that drew the cruelest attention. Her hind quarters sat lower than they should, giving her a perpetual crouch that made each step look like a struggle against gravity itself. A genetic defect, someone shouted from the stands. Not worth the bullet to put her down. Another voice called out, sparking a fresh round of cruel chuckles. The mare's nostrils flared wide as she turned her head slowly, taking in the faces around her. Her eyes, dark and liquid, held something that didn't match her broken body. They held fire. At the back of the barn, pressed against the wall near the exit where the shadows gathered thick, stood Liam Torres. His work shirt was stained with grease from the morning shift at the garage, his jeans worn thin at the knees, and his boots caked with the red Montana clay that never quite washed clean. He had $2,300 in his pocket, every cent saved over 2 years of oil changes and tire rotations. Money meant for a down payment on the tiny mechanic shop old Mr. Henderson was selling. His mother didn't know he was here. She thought he was picking up parts in the next county. If Rosa Torres knew her son was at a livestock auction with his entire savings, she would have locked him in the walk-in freezer at the diner until sense returned to his head. Liam had only stopped because he'd seen the trailer pulling into town that morning, heard the rumors at the coffee counter about Donovan Griffith unloading his culls. Griffith's name carried weight in Ridgewood, the kind of weight that came from owning half the valley and never letting anyone forget it. Liam had worked on Griffith's ranch trucks once, had seen the way the man treated his workers like they were disposable, and he'd refused to go back even when the money was good. Something about watching Griffith's rejects parade through the ring had pulled Liam inside, though he couldn't have explained why if someone asked. The auctioneer cleared his throat, his patience already thin. All right, folks, let's move this along. Mare, approximately 4 years old, grade horse, no papers, obvious conformational defects. His voice dripped with the professional detachment of someone who had sold thousands of animals and would sell thousands more. Starting bid $500. Silence fell like a stone into deep water. The auctioneer tried again, his tone shifting toward irritation. 300. Anyone. 200. The mare shifted her weight, her shortened legs trembling with the effort of standing still. A man in a Carhartt jacket raised his hand lazily. 75. Meat price. The words hit Liam like a physical blow. Meat price. The phrase used when an animal was worth more dead than alive, when its only value was the per-pound rate the rendering plant would pay. The mare would be loaded onto a truck within the hour, driven to a facility where her last moments would be filled with the smell of fear and blood, where she would become dog food and glue. The gavel started to rise. Liam's hand shot up before his brain caught up with his body. $1,000. Every head in the barn swiveled toward him. The auctioneer blinked, genuinely surprised for the first time that afternoon. The man in the Carhartt jacket turned fully around, squinting into the shadows where Liam stood. Who the hell is that? Someone muttered. The kid from the diner, another voice answered. Rosa's boy. Lost his damn mind. Liam felt his face flush hot, felt the weight of every stare pressing against his chest, but he kept his hand raised. The mare's ears swiveled toward him, as if she too was trying to locate the source of this unexpected reprieve. The auctioneer recovered quickly, his voice rising with renewed energy. Well, all right then, we have 1,000 from the young man in the back. Do I hear 1,100? The silence stretched long enough that Liam could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The man who'd bid meat price shook his head and spat into the dirt. She's all yours, kid. Enjoy throwing your money away. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the barn like a gunshot. Sold to the gentleman in the back for $1,000. Lot 47. Liam's legs felt unsteady as he made his way toward the ring. The mare stood motionless, watching him approach with those burning eyes. Up close, she looked even worse than she had from a distance. Ribs showed faintly through her dull coat. Scars crisscrossed her shoulders and flanks, some old and silver, others still pink and fresh. Her hooves were overgrown and cracked, and when she shifted her weight, Liam could see how much effort each movement cost her. But she held her head high despite everything, despite the laughter and the scars and the twisted legs that would never carry her the way a horse's legs should. The handler, a bored teenager with a clip of chewing tobacco in his lip, shoved the lead rope toward Liam. Your funeral, man. She's half crazy anyway. Tried to kick Griffith's head off last month. That's why he dumped her. Liam took the rope carefully, letting the mare see his hands before he moved closer. Her nostrils flared again, testing his scent. He could smell the fear on her, sharp and acrid beneath the dust and sweat. Easy, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm not here to hurt you. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore. The mare's ears flicked forward, then back, as if she was trying to decide whether to believe him. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the parking lot in shades of amber and rust. Liam led the mare slowly between rows of gleaming horse trailers that belonged to ranchers with money, past pickups worth more than his mother made in a year at the diner. His own borrowed trailer sat at the far end, its paint peeling and one taillight held on with duct tape. The mare balked when she saw it, planting her feet and throwing her head. The darkness inside must have reminded her of other trailers, other trips that ended in pain. Liam didn't pull. He stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on her neck, and waited. Come on, Pepper, he said softly, the name arriving in his mind without conscious thought, as if it had always belonged to her. Just trust me this once. The mare's breathing slowed gradually. She took one tentative step forward, then another. When she finally lunged up the ramp, the whole trailer rocked with the force of it, but she was inside. Liam secured the latch with shaking hands and pressed his forehead against the cool metal, eyes squeezed shut. What have I done, he thought. What the hell have I just done? The drive back to Ridgewood took 40 minutes, and every one of them felt like an hour. Liam kept glancing in the rearview mirror, catching glimpses of Pepper's silhouette through the trailer's small window. She stood rigid, braced against every bump and curve in the road. The radio played country songs about trucks and heartbreak, but Liam barely heard them over the roar of doubt in his head. He thought about the mechanic shop, about how Mr. Henderson had promised to hold. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Hold it for him until the end of the month. He thought about his mother's face when she found out, about the bills piled on her desk at the diner, about his little brother Mateo who needed new shoes and a winter coat before school started. But mostly he thought about the way the mare had looked at him in that ring, the way her eyes had asked a question he couldn't ignore. Are you going to let them throw me away? The truck rattled over the railroad tracks that marked the edge of town, past the feed store and the post office and the church with the crooked steeple. Ridgewood wasn't much, just a scattered collection of buildings clinging to the highway like barnacles on a ship. Most people passed through without stopping, on their way to somewhere better. But it was home for whatever that was worth. Rose's kitchen sat on Main Street between the hardware store and the laundromat, a squat brick building with a faded red awning and a neon sign that flickered when it rained. The diner had been in the Torres family for 30 years, passed down from Liam's grandmother to his mother when cancer took the old woman too young. It served the best breakfast in the county, or so the locals claimed, though Liam suspected loyalty had more to do with it than the food. His mother worked 16-hour days to keep the place running, arriving before dawn to prep the kitchen and staying long after the last customer left. The diner was her life, her identity, and lately it had been slowly bleeding her dry. Liam pulled the truck around to the back alley where a small corral had been hastily erected years ago when his grandfather Vicente still kept a riding horse. The fence posts were weathered gray and leaning slightly, the rails patched with whatever scrap lumber had been available. It wasn't much, but it was enclosed and it had a lean-to shelter on one side. It would have to do. He cut the engine and sat for a moment in the gathering dusk, watching the kitchen windows glow warm and yellow. He could see his mother's silhouette moving inside, probably wiping down counters and counting the register. He could hear the clatter of dishes and the hiss of the industrial dishwasher. The familiar sounds of home, about to be shattered by what he'd done. Before he could talk himself out of it, Liam climbed out of the truck and opened the trailer. Pepper stood trembling inside, her eyes rolling white. He spoke to her constantly as he backed her down the ramp. A steady stream of meaningless words meant only to fill the silence with something softer than fear. When her hooves touched solid ground, she stood perfectly still, taking in her new surroundings. The corral was small, maybe 30 feet square, with patches of scrub grass pushing through the hard-packed dirt. It wasn't green pastures or rolling hills, but it wasn't a slaughterhouse either. The back door of the diner swung open, yellow light spilling across the alley. Rosa Torres stood framed in the doorway, her apron stained with the day's work, her dark hair escaping from its bun in wisps around her face. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with the kind of presence that made people twice her size step aside. Her eyes went from Liam to the horse to the borrowed trailer, and Liam watched the sequence of emotions cross her face. Confusion first, then comprehension, then something that looked dangerously close to fury. "Liam Antonio Torres," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Tell me that is not a horse in our corral. Tell me you did not just bring a horse to our home when we can barely afford to keep the lights on at the diner." Liam opened his mouth, but no words came out that could possibly make this make sense. His mother descended the back steps slowly, each footfall deliberate, and crossed the alley to stand beside him. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into every line of her face, the gray threading through her hair that hadn't been there a year ago, the calluses on her hands from decades of hard work. She looked at Pepper, really looked at her, taking in the twisted legs and the scars and the ribs showing through the dull coat. Her expression shifted from anger to something softer and more painful. "Pity. Omijo," she breathed. "What have you done?" That was the question, wasn't it? What had he done? Liam tried to find the words to explain the moment in the auction barn. The way something had pulled tight in his chest when he heard meat price. The way the mare's eyes had spoken to him in a language older than words. But standing in the alley behind his mother's struggling diner with a broken horse and empty pockets, it all sounded like madness. The September night had settled fully over Ridgewood by the time grandfather Vicente appeared. He moved slowly, his cane tapping against the packed earth of the alley, but his eyes were sharp as ever beneath his weathered brow. Vicente Torres had worked ranches all over Montana in his youth, had gentled more horses than most people ever saw in a lifetime, and his hands bore the scars to prove it. Age had bent his back and stolen his strength, but it hadn't touched his understanding of the animals he'd spent his life among. He stopped at the corral fence and studied Pepper in silence, his weathered face unreadable in the dim light spilling from the diner's back windows. Rosa stood with her arms crossed tight against her chest, a posture Liam recognized from childhood, the stance she took when she was trying to hold herself together. "The diner is 3 months behind on rent," she said, her voice strained. "The bank called again yesterday about the loan. We need a new water heater, the roof is leaking over the kitchen, and the insurance went up another $200 a month." She turned to face her son, and Liam saw tears gathering in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "That money you saved, Liam, that was supposed to be your future. The shop, your chance to build something of your own." "I know," Liam said quietly. "Mama, I know." "Then why?" Rosa's voice cracked on the word. "Why would you throw it away on an animal that can barely stand? Look at her, Mijo. She's suffering. The kindest thing would have been to let her go." Liam flinched at the words, But before he could respond, Vicente spoke for the first time. She is not suffering, the old man said, his accented English deliberate and clear. She is fighting. There is a difference. Rosa whirled on her father. Don't encourage this, Papa. We cannot afford another mouth to feed, especially not one that serves no purpose. Vicente's expression remained calm, though something flickered in his eyes. No purpose. He turned back to Pepper, who stood watching them all with her ears swiveled forward. Tell me, Rosa, when you were 12 years old and your mother died, what purpose did I serve by keeping you and raising you alone? You could not work. You could not earn. You only ate and kneaded and cried in the night. Should I have measured your worth by what you cost me? The silence that followed was absolute. Rosa's face crumpled, and she pressed her hand to her mouth. That is not fair, she whispered. Vicente's voice gentled. No, it is not fair. Just as it is not fair to measure this animal's worth only by what she can produce. He looked at Liam then, really looked at him, and something passed between grandfather and grandson that needed no words. Your son saw something in that ring that we are standing too close to our fear to see. Perhaps we should trust his eyes. The back door opened again, and Mateo came tumbling out, his homework forgotten, his 12-year-old energy barely contained by his small frame. He scrambled down the steps and pressed himself against the fence rails, eyes wide with wonder. Whoa, he breathed. Is she ours? Can I name her? Does she bite? Liam found himself smiling despite everything. Already named her. Pepper. Mateo tested the name, rolling it around in his mouth. Pepper. I like it. Why is she shaped funny? Before Liam could answer, Vicente spoke again. She was born different. Sometimes nature makes mistakes with the bones, with how things grow. It means she will never run fast or jump high or do the work that other horses do. So what can she do? Mateo asked, the question innocent and devastating. Vicente smiled, a rare expression that creased his weathered face. She can teach us that worth is not measured in speed or strength. That sometimes the broken things have the most to offer if we are brave enough to see it. Rosa made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. You are impossible, both of you. How am I supposed to argue against poetry and philosophy when we have bills to pay? Vicente tapped his cane against the ground. Give the boy 1 week. If in that time the horse proves to be only a burden, then we will make the hard choice. But if there is even the smallest sign that this was meant to be, then we trust that the path will reveal itself. 1 week. Rosa repeated, her voice hollow. And then what, Papa? Then we sell her for meat anyway. We drag this out just to arrive at the same ending. Not the same ending, Vicente said quietly. Because in that week, perhaps we learn something about ourselves that we needed to know. Rosa stared at her father, then at her son, then at the strange little mare standing crooked in the corral. Liam could see the war happening inside her. The practical necessity battling against something softer that she tried so hard to keep buried beneath the weight of responsibility. Finally, she exhaled a long, shuddering breath. 1 week, not a day more. And Liam, you work double shifts at the garage to make up for what you spent. The diner cannot support this. Yes, Mama, Liam said, relief flooding through him so intensely his knees felt weak. Thank you. Rosa held up a hand. Do not thank me. I think you have made a terrible mistake, and I think we will all pay for it. But your grandfather is right about one thing. You saw something the rest of us did not. So prove to me it was worth seeing. She turned and walked back toward the diner, her shoulders carrying the weight of one more worry added to an already crushing load. Mateo stayed pressed against the fence, reaching his hand through the rails toward Pepper. The mare eyed him warily but didn't retreat. Can I help take care of her? He asked Liam. I could brush her. I saw it in a movie once. You gotta brush horses. Liam ruffled his brother's hair. Yeah, you can help. But you have to be patient with her. Okay. She's been hurt. She doesn't know yet that we're different from the people who hurt her before. Mateo nodded solemnly, as if being entrusted with a sacred duty. I'll be so patient. I'll be the most patient ever. Vicente moved closer to the fence, studying Pepper with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades reading horses. She has good bone in her front legs, he observed. And look at her chest. How deep it is. Her wind will be strong. The back legs, yes, they are wrong. But the heart, he tapped his own chest, the heart is right. I can see it in how she holds herself. Broken but not defeated. That is rare. Liam leaned against the fence beside his grandfather, watching Pepper watch them back. At the auction, he said quietly, when they said meat price, I couldn't let it happen. I know it doesn't make sense. I know we can't afford it. But I couldn't walk away. Vicente nodded slowly. When I was young, even younger than you, I found a dog on the road. Hit by a car, leg shattered. Everyone said to shoot it. But I carried that dog 5 miles to a veterinarian. Spent every cent I had saved to fix the leg. My father beat me for the waist. The dog lived another 12 years. Never walked quite right, but loyal until his last breath. He glanced at Liam. Sometimes the foolish choice is the only one we can live with afterward. Your mother will forgive you in time. The question is whether you will forgive yourself if this does not end well. The words settled heavy in Liam's chest. He hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered what it would feel like if Pepper's condition worsened. If the week passed and they had to make the choice Rosa had implied. The thought of loading Pepper back into that trailer, of driving her to the same fate he'd rescued her from, made something twist painfully behind his ribs. I won't let it come to that, he said, though he had no idea how he would prevent it. I'll find a way. Vicente smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. The young always think they can outrun fate with determination alone. Sometimes they are right. Mostly they learn that some battles cannot be won, only fought with honor. He turned to head back inside, his cane tapping a slow rhythm. But for what it is worth, Mijo, I am glad you tried. The world has too many who walk past suffering because it is easier than stopping. Liam watched his grandfather disappear into the diner, then turned back to Pepper. She had moved closer to the fence, drawn perhaps by Mateo's continued soft chatter about all the things they would do together, all the adventures they would have. The night air carried the smell of fry oil and coffee from the diner, mixing with the dusty scent of horse and dry Montana earth. Liam reached through the rails slowly, letting Pepper see his hand, giving her every chance to move away. She stood still, nostrils flaring, processing this new human who spoke quietly and moved without threat. Then, with a deliberation that felt momentous, she stretched her neck forward and touched her muzzle to his palm. The contact lasted only seconds before she jerked away, but it was enough. Enough to kindle hope, dangerous and fragile as a candle flame in wind. We're gonna figure this out, Liam whispered to her. I don't know how yet, but we will. The first rays of dawn had barely touched the Montana sky when Liam woke to the sound of his mother moving through the diner kitchen below his room. The building was old enough that every footstep transmitted through the floors, every clang of pots and pans serving as an alarm clock more reliable than any device. He lay still for a moment, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles, letting the reality of what he'd done sink in fully. Somewhere below, in the small corral behind the building, was a horse he'd bought with money that wasn't really his to spend. A horse with legs that didn't work right and a future that looked darker than the pre-dawn shadows filling his room. He dressed quickly in yesterday's work clothes, pulling on his grease-stained jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better years. The floor was cold beneath his bare feet as he crossed to the window that overlooked the alley. From this angle, he could just make out a corner of the corral. Pepper stood in the lean-to shelter, her odd silhouette unmistakable even in the dim light. She hadn't laid down, he realized. She'd stood all night, either too uncomfortable or too wary of this new place to rest. The sight made his chest ache with a mixture of concern and something deeper he couldn't quite name. Downstairs, the diner smelled of coffee and bacon grease, the industrial ovens already radiating heat that would make the kitchen unbearable by mid-morning. Rosa stood at the prep counter, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she mixed biscuit dough. She didn't look up when Liam entered, but her shoulders tensed in a way that told him she knew he was there. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Liam poured himself coffee from the pot that was always brewing, the bitter liquid scalding his tongue when he drank too quickly. I'm going to check on her before my shift at the garage, he said finally, his voice rough from sleep. Rosa's hands paused in their work, flour dusting her forearms like snow. She needs water and hay. Vicente left some feed by the back door last night. He must have gone to the supply store after we all went to bed. The words were delivered without inflection. A simple statement of fact, but Liam heard the undercurrent. His grandfather, at least, was on his side. He set down his coffee cup and moved toward the back door, but his mother's voice stopped him. Liam. He turned. Rosa still didn't look at him, her attention fixed on the dough she was kneading with more force than necessary. When your father left, you were only 6 years old. Too young to remember much about him, I think. But I remember. I remember how he would come home with grand ideas, schemes that were going to make us rich, solve all our problems. He spent our savings on a truck that broke down after 2 weeks. He invested in a friend's business that never existed. Always chasing something he could not quite explain, something he felt in his gut. Her hands stilled, and she finally met his eyes. He left us with nothing but debt and broken promises. I have spent 17 years digging us out of the hole he created. So when I see you making choices with your heart instead of your head, spending money we do not have on something you cannot justify, forgive me if it brings back memories I would rather forget. The comparison stung more than any anger could have. Liam felt something crumble inside his chest. The naive certainty that had carried him through the auction now seeming childish in the harsh light of his mother's experience. I'm not Dad, he managed, though his voice came out smaller than he intended. I know you're not, Rosa said, and now her voice gentled slightly. You have worked hard, saved carefully, been responsible in ways he never was. Which is why this worries me even more. If you were reckless, I would understand. But you are not. So this choice you made, this horse, it means something I do not yet understand. And that frightens me. Liam had no response that would ease her fear because he didn't fully understand it himself. He only knew that walking away from Pepper yesterday had felt impossible, like leaving a part of himself behind in that auction ring. He picked up his coffee again, needing something to do with his hands. 1 week, he said quietly. I'll prove she's worth it. Or he swallowed hard, I'll do what needs to be done. His mother nodded once, a sharp movement, and returned to her biscuits. The conversation was over. Outside, the September morning carried a chill that promised autumn's approach. The sun was just cresting the mountains to the east, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that seemed too beautiful for how Liam felt inside. He found the feed sacks his grandfather had left, 20-pound bags of grain and 2 bales of hay that must have cost the old man a week's pension. Guilt added itself to the complex mixture of emotions churning in his gut. Pepper was his responsibility, but already the weight of caring for her was spreading to others, dragging them into the consequences of his impulsive decision. He approached the corral slowly, making noise so as not to startle her. Pepper's head came up immediately, her ears swiveling toward him with suspicious attention. In the morning light, she looked even worse than she had the night before. Her coat was matted with dried sweat and dirt, and he could see now that she favored her right front leg slightly, a hitch in her stance that suggested old injury or chronic pain. Her twisted hind legs forced her to stand in an unnatural position that must have put strain on her entire body. She watched him with those dark, liquid eyes as he climbed over the fence rails, carrying a flake of hay in his arms. Morning, Pepper, he said softly, keeping his voice low and even. He'd learned from his grandfather that horses responded more to tone than words, that a calm voice could soothe where a loud one would frighten. I brought you breakfast. Hope you like Timothy hay because that's all we've got. He placed the hay on the ground about 10 feet from where she stood and backed away, giving her space. Pepper didn't move immediately. She stood rigid, every muscle taut, as if expecting the hay to transform into a threat. Liam sat down, in the dirt, making himself smaller, less intimidating. He'd read somewhere that predators stood tall while prey animals stayed low. If he wanted her to trust him, he needed to seem less like a threat. Minutes passed. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, and somewhere down the street, a dog barked at passing cars. Liam stayed motionless, barely breathing, watching Pepper through half-closed eyes so as not to stare directly. Finally, She took one cautious step forward. Then another. Her gait was heartbreaking to watch, each movement requiring visible effort, her body compensating for the legs that didn't work properly. She reached the hay and lowered her head, but even then, she kept one eye on Liam, ready to bolt if he moved. The sound of her eating, the rhythmic tearing and grinding of teeth on hay, filled the quiet morning. Liam felt something loosen in his chest. It was such a simple thing, a horse eating breakfast, but after the night she'd spent standing rigid and afraid, it felt like progress. He stayed sitting for another 20 minutes, letting her finish, letting her grow accustomed to his presence as something benign rather than threatening. When she'd eaten her fill, she raised her head and looked at him directly, and for the first time, her ears came forward with what might have been curiosity instead of fear. Liam rose slowly, telegraphing every movement, and climbed back over the fence. He had to get to work, had to start making up the money he'd spent, but he felt oddly reluctant to leave, as if the fragile connection they'd just formed might dissolve the moment he turned his back. From the diner's back door, Mateo appeared, still in his pajamas, clutching a piece of toast. "Can I stay with her while you're gone?" he asked around a mouthful of bread. "Just sit with her like you did." Liam smiled despite everything. "Yeah, you can sit with her, but don't try to touch her yet. Okay, she's still scared. Just talk to her. Tell her about school or whatever." Mateo nodded enthusiastically and plopped down on the ground outside the corral, beginning an animated one-sided conversation about his upcoming math test, and how his teacher Mrs. Henderson was probably a robot, because no human could be that boring. Liam listened to his brother's chatter as he walked toward the truck, and he saw Pepper's ears swivel toward the sound, tracking the young voice with what looked like interest. Maybe, he thought, just maybe this could work. The garage where Liam worked sat on the edge of town, a cinder-block building with 3 bays and a perpetually full parking lot of vehicles waiting for repair. His boss, Frank Mitchell, was a decent man who paid fair wages and didn't ask too many questions as long as the work got done. Liam had been there since dropping out of community college 2 years ago, when it became clear his mother needed help with bills more than he needed a degree. He was good with engines, had an intuitive understanding of how mechanical systems worked, and Frank had been slowly teaching him the business side, preparing him for the day when he might take over or open his own place. That day felt very far away now. Liam threw himself into work with a desperate energy, taking every job Frank offered, volunteering for the messy ones nobody else wanted. He changed oil on a lifted pickup that required crawling into tight spaces. He diagnosed a mysterious rattle in a sedan that turned out to be a loose heat shield. He replaced brake pads on a minivan while a harried mother of 3 paced the waiting room, checking her watch every 30 seconds. Each task completed was money earned, a small step toward recovering what he'd spent, toward proving to his mother that he could make this work. During his lunch break, he sat in the break room with a sandwich Rosa had packed that morning, mechanically chewing without tasting. His phone buzzed with a text from Mateo, a blurry photo of Pepper taken through the fence rails. "She let me get closer," the message read. "Didn't run away." Liam studied the image, zooming in on Pepper's face. Her ears were forward in the photo, her expression alert but not frightened. Something warm spread through his chest, momentarily pushing back the anxiety that had been his constant companion since yesterday. "Hey Torres." Frank's voice pulled him from his thoughts. The older man stood in the doorway, wiping his hands on a red shop rag that had long ago given up being red. "You got a minute?" They walked out to the parking lot where Frank kept his personal truck, a beautifully maintained 1970 Ford that he babied like a show animal. "I heard you bought yourself a horse yesterday," Frank said without preamble. News travels fast in a small town, and apparently faster when you do something crazy. Liam felt his face flush. "Yes, sir." Frank nodded slowly, squinting against the midday sun. "Also heard it was Donovan Griffith's reject. The one with the bad legs." Liam's jaw tightened at the casual dismissal, the automatic assumption that Pepper was worthless. "She's not," he started, but Frank held up a hand. "I'm not here to judge, kid. Your money, your choice. But I am going to tell you something, and you can take it or leave it." He leaned against his truck, arms crossed. 20 years ago, my daughter brought home a 3-legged cat. Mangy thing, mean as hell, hissed at everything that moved. My wife said no. I said no. We had 2 healthy cats already. Didn't need another mouth to feed, especially one that couldn't even do what cats are supposed to do. But my little girl, she looked at me with those big eyes and said, "Daddy, nobody else will want him." And I was stuck. Liam waited, unsure where this was going. Frank continued, his voice softer now. That cat lived another 8 years. Never caught a single mouse, knocked over more stuff than I could count with that stumbling walk, and cost me a fortune in vet bills. But you know what? That cat loved my daughter like she'd hung the moon. Would sleep on her bed every night, purr like a motor when she was sad, wait by the door for her to come home from school. When he finally died, she was 16, and she cried for a week. He met Liam's eyes. Point is, sometimes worth isn't about what something can do. It's about what it means. Now get back to work. You've got a horse to feed. The words stayed with Liam through the rest of his shift, a small beacon of validation in the sea of doubt. When he finally clocked out at 6, his body aching from 10 hours of physical labor, he drove home through the golden light of early evening. The diner was in full dinner rush when he arrived, every booth filled with locals who'd been coming to Rose's kitchen for decades. He slipped in through the back to avoid the crowd and found Vicente in the corral with Pepper, moving slowly along the fence line while the mare tracked his movements. His grandfather looked up as Liam approached. "She has been watching me for an hour," the old man said, "following me with her eyes, learning my patterns. This is good. It means she is curious, not just afraid." Liam climbed the fence and sat on the top rail. "Did you work with horses like her before?" "Ones with," he gestured vaguely at Pepper's hind legs, "with problems like that." Vicente shook his head. "Never exactly like this, but I worked with many horses people had given up on. Ones that bucked, that bit, that refused to be caught. The specific problem changes, but the solution is usually the same. Patience. Consistency. Proving you are trustworthy even when they have every reason not to trust." "How long does that take?" Liam asked, thinking of the 1-week deadline his mother had given him. "Sometimes days," Vicente said. "Sometimes months. Sometimes never. There is no formula, no guaranteed timeline. You work with what the horse gives you and hope it is enough." He turned to face Liam fully, his weathered face serious. "But I will tell you this. That mare, she has something I did not expect to see. She has will. I watched her today, how she moved around the corral, testing the fence, studying the diner, always alert. She is not giving up, even though her body makes everything harder. That kind of will is either a gift or a curse, depending on whether we can channel it." Before Liam could respond, a vehicle pulled into the alley, a black Range Rover that looked obscenely expensive next to the diner's dumpster and recycling bins. Liam's stomach dropped even before the driver's door opened and Donovan Griffith stepped out. The man was in his 50s, tall and lean, dressed in what Liam recognized as the casual wear of the wealthy. Jeans that probably cost more than Liam made in a week and a button-down shirt that fit too perfectly to be off the rack. His boots were ostrich leather, polished to a mirror shine despite this being ranch country where boots were meant for work, not show. Griffith surveyed the alley with barely concealed disdain, his eyes passing over the rusted dumpster, the cracked pavement, the modest corral before finally landing on Liam. "I heard you bought my mare yesterday," he said without preamble, his voice carrying the lazy confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Liam climbed down from the fence, positioning himself between Griffith and Pepper instinctively. "She's my mare now." Griffith smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course. Legal sale, all above board. I'm not here to contest that. I'm actually here to make things easier for you." Vicente moved to stand beside his grandson, his presence a silent support. "Easier how?" the old man asked, his accent more pronounced than usual, something that happened when he was suspicious or angry. Griffith pulled an envelope from his back pocket, opened it to reveal a check. "I'll give you $3,000 for her. Right now, today. That's twice what you paid. A tidy profit for less than 24 hours of ownership." He held out the check, letting the number be clearly visible. $3,000. Enough to recover Liam's loss and have money left over. Enough to smooth things over with his mother, to get back on track toward the mechanic shop. All he had to do was take the check and load Pepper back into the trailer. Liam's hand twitched, almost reaching for the check before he caught himself. "Why," he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "Why would you pay 3 times what she's worth to get her back?" Griffith's smile tightened. "Let's just say I don't like loose ends. That mare came from my breeding program, carries my reputation. Having her limp around town, looking the way she does, it reflects poorly on my operation. Better if she just disappears." The casual cruelty of the words, the easy way Griffith talked about making Pepper disappear, ignited something hot in Liam's chest. "She's not going to disappear," he said, and was surprised by the hardness in his own voice. "She's staying right here." Griffith's expression shifted, the pleasant mask slipping to reveal something colder underneath. "You don't understand what you're getting into, son. That mare is defective, always has been. I tried to work with her, gave her every chance, but some animals are just born wrong. You're wasting your time and your money trying to make something out of nothing." Vicente's cane tapped sharply against the ground. "I think you have your answer, senor. Time for you to leave." For a long moment, Griffith stared at them both, and Liam could see him recalculating, trying a different approach. "Look," he said, his tone shifting to something approximating reasonableness. "I understand the impulse to save something. Hell, I respect it. But be practical. That mare will never be sound. She'll eat and cost you money and give you nothing in return. I'm offering you a way out with your dignity and your wallet intact. It's a good deal. Take it." The check still hung in the air between them, and Liam could feel its pull, the temptation of the easy solution. Behind him, he heard Pepper move, the uneven scrape of her hooves against the ground, and the sound steeled his resolve. "No," he said simply. The word hung in the cooling evening air, final and absolute. Griffith's face hardened completely, the last pretense of friendliness evaporating. "You're making a mistake. A big one. This town is small, Torres. My family has been here for 4 generations. We own the bank, half the businesses on Main Street, including the building your mother rents for her little diner. You might want to think carefully about making an enemy of me over a crippled horse." The threat wasn't subtle, and it sent ice water through Liam's veins. But Vicente stepped forward, his aged body somehow commanding in its dignity. "We are not afraid of you, Donovan," the old man said quietly. "Your grandfather, I knew him. He was a hard man, but honest. Your father, also hard but fair. You are neither. You hide cruelty behind smiles and think your money makes you untouchable. But I have lived long enough to see men like you fall, and it always starts the same way, with someone finally saying no." Griffith's jaw worked, fury and frustration playing across his features. He looked at Liam one more time, and when he spoke, his voice was soft and dangerous. "1 week," he said. "I'll give you 1 week to realize what a mistake you've made. After that, well, we'll see how long you last." He turned on his heel and strode back to his Range Rover, the engine roaring to life with expensive power. They watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing down the alley. Liam realized he was shaking, adrenaline flooding his system now that the confrontation was over. "That was bad," he said, his voice unsteady. "That was really bad." Vicente nodded slowly. "Yes, you have made a powerful enemy, but you have also drawn a line in the sand. Sometimes that is necessary even when it is dangerous." From the corral, Pepper whinnied, a sound that was part distress, part question. She stood pressed against the far fence, her body tense, as if she'd sensed the threat in Griffith's presence. Liam walked over to her, moving slowly, and for the first time she didn't retreat. He reached through the rails and she let his hand come within inches of her scarred shoulder before finally, tentatively, she lowered her head and touched her nose to his palm. The contact sent a jolt through him, fragile connection made flesh. "I won't let him take you back," he whispered. "Promise." Behind him, Vicente's voice carried across the corral. "Be careful with promises, Mijo. They have a way of demanding more than we think we can give." Liam knew his grandfather was right, knew that the promise he'd just made might be one he couldn't keep. But looking into Pepper's dark eyes, seeing the question there. The desperate hope that maybe, finally, someone would choose her. He couldn't bring himself to take the words back. The September night settled over Ridgewood, and in the small corral behind a struggling diner, a young man and a broken horse stood together, both wondering if trust was something that could be learned or if some wounds went too deep to heal. The dinner rush at Rose's kitchen finally ended around 9, the last customers filing out into the night with full stomachs and the satisfied exhaustion of a long workday behind them. Liam helped his mother clean up, scrubbing dishes in silence while she wiped down tables and refilled salt shakers for tomorrow. The radio played softly in the background, old country songs about heartbreak and hard times, the soundtrack to every night of his childhood. Rosa moved through her closing routine with mechanical efficiency, but Liam could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her mouth was set in a thin line. She'd heard about Griffith's visit. Mateo had seen it from the upstairs window and told her immediately, and now the silence between them was loaded with everything she wasn't saying. Finally, as Liam was emptying the last of the mop water down the drain, she spoke. "He threatened us, didn't he?" Not a question, a statement. Liam set down the mop bucket and turned to face his mother. He said his family owns the building, implied that our lease might be in jeopardy if I don't give Pepper back. Rosa's hands stilled on the table she was wiping, and she closed her eyes. Of course he did. Of course. She opened her eyes and looked at her son, and he saw fear there, raw and real. "Liam, this diner is all we have. If we lose the lease, we lose everything. Our home is upstairs. Where would we go? What would we do?" The weight of it crashed over Liam like a wave, the full consequences of his choice spreading outward in ways he hadn't fully considered. It wasn't just about him and Pepper anymore. It was about his mother's life's work, about Mateo's stability, about Vicente's home in his final years. The enormity of what he'd risked, what he was continuing to risk, threatened to crush him. "I'll give her back," he heard himself say, the words tasting like ash. "Tomorrow. I'll call Griffith and tell him he can have her. His voice cracked. "I'll do what I should have done at the auction," and just walked away. Rosa studied her son's face, seeing the devastation there, the way something vital was crumbling behind his eyes. She set down her rag and came around the table, standing in front of him. She was so much smaller than him, barely reaching his shoulder, but she reached up and cupped his face in her work-worn hands. "Omijo," she said softly, "I did not say you had to give her back. I said I was afraid. There is a difference." Liam blinked, confusion cutting through his misery. "But you said the diner, everything we have." Rosa smiled, and it was sad but real. "Yes, everything we have. But what is everything if we give up who we are to keep it? Your father, for all his faults, he taught me something. He showed me that living only for safety, for security, that is not really living. It is just slowly dying of fear." She dropped her hands but held his gaze. "When you were 6 and he left, I was terrified. I had 2 babies, a struggling business, no education to fall back on. I could have sold the diner, moved to the city, found some safe job that would have kept us fed but nothing more. But I chose to stay, to fight for this place, even though it was risky and hard and there were so many times I wanted to quit. I chose it because some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight looks impossible." Liam felt his throat tighten, words trapped behind the emotions swelling in his chest. "Does that mean you're okay with keeping Pepper? With risking everything?" Rosa shook her head. "I am not okay with it, not even a little bit. I am terrified. I am angry that we are in this position. I am furious at Donovan Griffith for being exactly the kind of bully who thinks money gives him the right to threaten people. But," and she poked him gently in the chest, "I am also proud of you. Proud that when you saw something wrong, you acted. Even if it was reckless, even if it might cost us, you stood up. That takes courage I am not sure I have anymore. So no, you will not give her back. We will figure out another way." The relief that flooded through Liam was so intense he had to sit down, his legs suddenly unable to support him. He sank into the nearest chair, and his mother sat beside him. "How," he asked, "how do we fight someone like Griffith? He has money, power, connections." Rosa was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. Then Vicente's voice came from the doorway, startling them both. They hadn't heard him come in. "We fight him the same way David fought Goliath," the old man said, moving slowly into the dining room. "Not with the weapons he expects, but with the ones he cannot defend against. Truth, community, the courage to stand when standing is hard." Liam looked between his mother and grandfather, seeing something pass between them, some understanding born of years of struggling together. "What do you mean?" he asked. Vicente lowered himself into a chair with a wince. "Griffith's power comes from fear and isolation. He threatens you because he thinks you are alone, that you have no support. But what if you are not alone? What if the whole town sees what he is trying to do?" Rosa nodded slowly, catching on. "The diner is the heart of Ridgewood. Everyone comes through here eventually. If people know what Griffith did, how he's threatening us over a horse he was going to slaughter anyway." She trailed off, thinking. "Public opinion," Liam said, understanding dawning. "We make it public. We make it so he can't quietly destroy us without everyone knowing why." Vicente smiled. "Exactly. Bullies prefer shadows. Bring them into the light and they become much less frightening." "But," Rosa held up a hand, "we have to be smart about this. Direct accusations could backfire, could give him legal grounds to come after us for defamation. We need to let the story tell itself." Liam thought about this, turning the idea over in his mind. "The diner's social media page," he said. "We've barely used it, but we have almost 800 followers, mostly locals. What if we just told the truth? Posted about Pepper, about the auction, about trying to save her. No accusations, just the facts. And let people draw their own conclusions," Rosa finished. She pulled out her phone, opened the diner's Facebook page that she'd set up years ago but rarely updated. "We could start tomorrow. Pictures of Pepper, updates on her progress. Make it a feel-good story about second chances. When Griffith makes his move, if he does, it will be obvious to everyone who he's targeting and why." Vicente nodded approvingly. "Good. But that is only defense. You also need offense. You need to show that Pepper is worth saving, that she has value beyond what Griffith claimed. You need to prove him wrong in a way everyone can see." The words echoed in Liam's head long after they'd all gone to bed, long after the diner lights were shut off and the building settled into its nighttime creaks and groans. He lay awake in his small room, moonlight streaming through the window, and thought about what proving Pepper's worth would look like. She couldn't race, couldn't jump, couldn't do any of the things horses were typically valued for. But she could, what could she do that would matter, that would justify everything he'd risked for her? The answer didn't come that night, but the question planted itself deep in his mind, a seed that would need time and attention to grow into something real. The Wednesday morning sun slanted through the kitchen windows of Rosa's kitchen, catching dust motes in golden shafts of light that made the worn linoleum floor look almost beautiful. Liam stood at the prep counter with his phone, trying to frame a photograph that would capture Pepper without making her look as broken as she was. The mare stood in the corral, her head turned toward the diner as if she could sense what he was trying to do. Even with careful angles and morning light, there was no hiding the reality of her condition. Her hind legs bent at wrong angles. Her coat remained dull despite the brushing Mateo had given her the night before, and the wariness in her eyes spoke of experiences no camera could soften. Rosa appeared beside him, coffee cup in hand, and looked over his shoulder at the screen. "Just take the picture as it is," she said quietly. "If we try to hide what she looks like, we are no better than the people who threw her away. The truth is what matters, even when the truth is not pretty." Liam nodded and snapped the photo, Pepper's crooked stance captured in honest detail. He spent the next 20 minutes crafting a post, writing and rewriting the words until they felt right. Finally, he settled on something simple and direct. 3 days ago, I went to the Ridgewood Livestock Auction and saw this mare being sold for meat price. Her name is Pepper, and she has a condition that affects her back legs. Most people looked at her and saw waste, something to be discarded. I looked at her and saw something else. I'm not sure yet what her future holds, but I know she deserves a chance to find out. Sometimes the things worth saving are the ones nobody else wants. He posted it with the photo, then set his phone down and tried not to think about it. Within an hour, The post had 37 likes and a dozen comments. By the time Liam left for his morning shift at the garage, that number had doubled. The comments ranged from supportive to skeptical. Mrs. Patterson from the church wrote, "Bless you for having such a kind heart." Old Bill Hutchins, who ran cattle on the land adjacent to Griffith's property, commented, "That's one of Donovan's culls. Good on you for giving her a shot, kid." But there were others, anonymous profiles with generic names writing things like "waste of money and you can't fix genetics and sometimes mercy is letting them go." Liam tried to ignore the negative responses, but they burrowed under his skin like splinters, small and painful. At the garage, Frank greeted him with a knowing look. "Saw your post this morning," he said without preamble. "Half the town's talking about it already." Liam felt his stomach clench. "Is that good or bad?" Frank shrugged, pulling on his work gloves. "Depends on what you're hoping for. You wanted attention, you got it. Now you gotta deliver something worth paying attention to." He gestured toward the bay where a transmission rebuild waited. "In the meantime, we got work to do. Stop checking your phone every 5 minutes and focus." The day dragged with excruciating slowness. Every spare moment, Liam found himself pulling out his phone to check the post's progress. The numbers kept climbing. By lunch, it had been shared 42 times. By mid-afternoon, someone from the local newspaper had commented asking if they could do a story. The attention was both thrilling and terrifying. A spotlight that could either illuminate Pepper's worth or expose Liam's foolishness for all to see. He thought about Griffith seeing the post, imagined the man's reaction, and felt a chill run down his spine despite the garage's stifling heat. When he finally got home that evening, exhausted and covered in transmission fluid that had sprayed across his shirt during a particularly difficult bolt removal, he found the corral surrounded by people. Not a crowd exactly, but a steady stream of neighbors who had apparently decided to stop by and see the famous mare for themselves. Mrs. Chun from the laundromat stood talking with the Kowalski brothers who worked road construction. The Reverend Paul from First Baptist was there, along with young families Liam recognized from the diner's weekend breakfast rush. They all had their phones out, taking pictures, posting their own comments and observations. Mateo had positioned himself as an unofficial tour guide, standing on the bottom rail of the fence and narrating Pepper's story to anyone who would listen. "And her legs are like that because of genetics," he explained to a young couple Liam didn't recognize. "But she's really smart. Watch this." He made a clicking sound with his tongue, and Pepper's ears swiveled toward him. She had learned in just 3 days to associate that sound with Mateo's presence, with the quiet boy who read to her and brought her apple slices stolen from the diner's kitchen. "See, she knows me now." Rosa emerged from the diner carrying a tray of coffee samples, a marketing tactic she employed during busy times. She was smiling, actually smiling, as she offered free coffee to the gathered neighbors. Liam caught his mother's eye and she gave him a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, this crazy plan was working. Vicente sat on an overturned bucket near the fence, answering questions about horse care and sharing stories from his ranch days. The old man was in his element, surrounded by people who wanted to hear what he had to say. His expertise suddenly valuable again after years of being dismissed as just another aging relic of Ridgewood's past. Liam made his way through the small crowd, accepting congratulations and answering questions about Pepper's history. When he finally reached the corral fence, he found Ava Brennan standing there, a woman he'd seen around town but never really talked to. She was in her mid-20s, tall and lean with arms that showed the kind of muscle that came from physical labor. Her hands were scarred and calloused, her fingernails perpetually dark with the kind of grime that came from working with metal and fire. She ran the old farrier business her father had left her when he passed 2 years ago, a trade that was dying out as more people sent their horses to veterinary clinics for hoof care. "That's quite a following you've built in 3 days," Ava said without looking at him, her eyes fixed on Pepper. The mare had retreated to the far corner of the corral, overwhelmed by all the attention. Liam leaned against the fence beside her. "Wasn't really the plan. I just wanted people to know her story." Ava nodded slowly. "Story's good. Execution's going to be the hard part." She finally turned to look at him, her gray eyes sharp and assessing. You have any actual plan for her, or is this all just feel-good social media nonsense? The bluntness of the question caught Liam off guard. He started, then stopped. Honestly, I don't know yet. I'm still figuring it out. Ava's expression softened slightly. At least you're honest. Most people would have fed me some line about rehabilitation and recovery and how love conquers all. She turned back to Pepper, studying the mare's conformation with a professional eye. Her front end is actually pretty decent. Good shoulder angle, nice depth through the chest. It's just the back that's a disaster. Those hocks are rotated inward, probably from birth. She'll never have normal range of motion, and the strain on her stifles must be constant. Liam felt his heart sink. So you're saying there's nothing that can be done? Ava shrugged. I'm saying normal is off the table. But normal isn't the only option. I've been thinking about this since I saw your post this morning. What if we focused on making her comfortable instead of trying to fix her? Custom shoes, pads to redistribute her weight, maybe even some kind of support brace for the worst days. She wouldn't be sound by any standard definition, but she might be pain-free. Or at least pain-reduced. The idea sparked something in Liam's chest. A flutter of possibility. You could do that. Make custom shoes for her. Ava laughed, but it wasn't unkind. I'm a farrier. Custom work is literally what I do. Question is whether you can afford it. This wouldn't be cheap, and it would take time to get right. A lot of trial and error, a lot of failed attempts before we found something that worked. Liam thought about his bank account, currently sitting at around $300 after his last paycheck from the garage. He thought about the money he'd need for feed, for basic supplies, for any emergency vet care if Pepper's condition worsened. I can't pay you what it's worth, he admitted. Not right now, but I could work it off. I'm good with my hands, good with repairs. If you need anything fixed or built or... Ava held up a hand, stopping him. Let me finish. I wasn't going to charge you. She must have seen the protest forming on his face because she continued quickly. Look, my dad spent 30 years in this trade watching it die. Fewer horses, fewer people who care about proper hoof care, more vets who treat farrier work like it's just manual labor any idiot can do. When he died, everyone assumed I'd sell the business, go do something more practical. But I kept it going because someone has to, and because every once in a while a case comes along that reminds me why this work matters. She pulled a small notebook from her back pocket, flipped it open to a page covered in sketches and measurements. I drew these last night after seeing your post. Preliminary designs for shoes that might work for Pepper's conformation. I want to try them, not for you, but because this is the kind of problem my dad would have loved to solve. He always said the interesting cases were the impossible ones. So let me work on your horse, and if it works, you let me document the process. Photos, measurements, progress notes. Something I can use to show that farrier work is more than just nailing on pre-made shoes. Liam stared at her, overwhelmed by the unexpected offer. You do that. Just help her because you want to. Ava's expression turned wry. Don't make me sound noble. I'm getting something out of this too. If I can successfully shoe a horse with a severe conformational defect, that's a resume builder. That's something I can point to when people question whether this profession has value in the modern world. She closed her notebook and tucked it away. So what do you say? Let me take a crack at making Pepper comfortable. Yes, Liam said immediately, before his practical side could interfere with his desperate hope. Yes, absolutely, thank you. Ava nodded once, crisp and businesslike. Good. I'll come by tomorrow with some measurement tools and do a full assessment. Fair warning, the first few attempts probably won't work. We might have to try a dozen different designs before finding something that helps. Pepper's not going to like the process much either. Fitting custom shoes requires a lot of handling, a lot of patience. She looked past Liam to where the mare stood watching them. Is she broke to handle, or am I going to lose a finger trying to work on her? Liam searched for the right word, complicated. She's scared but not vicious. Mateo's been working with her, getting her used to being touched. She'll tolerate some handling, but she's not relaxed about it. Ava absorbed this information with a nod. Then we start slow. Build trust before we build shoes. I've got time. Her gaze shifted to the small crowd still gathered around the corral. Looks like you've got plenty of moral support at least. Use it. These people are here because they want to believe in something. Give them reasons to keep believing. As if summoned by her words, a black Range Rover pulled into the alley, parting the crowd like a shark through a school of fish. Liam's stomach dropped as Donovan Griffith stepped out, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes hard as flint. The conversations around the corral died away as people recognized him, the crowd instinctively creating space. Griffith surveyed the scene with barely concealed disdain, his gaze sweeping across the neighbors, the coffee cups, the phone cameras, before finally landing on Liam. "Quite the gathering you've got here," Griffith said, his voice carrying easily in the sudden silence. "Though I'm not sure what everyone's celebrating. That mare's still just as defective as she was at the auction. Nothing's changed except now more people are watching you fail." Liam felt Ava tense beside him, felt the weight of every eye in the alley turning to see how he would respond. His mouth went dry, words scattering like startled birds. But Vicente's voice cut through before Liam could speak. "Things have changed, Donovan," the old man said, rising slowly from his bucket with the aid of his cane. 3 days ago, that mare was alone, destined for slaughter, worth nothing to anyone. Now she has a home, people who care about her welfare, and a community watching her story. That seems like significant change to me." Griffith's jaw tightened. "A community watching a circus? You mean, this isn't a rescue, it's a spectacle. And when the spectacle ends, when reality sets in and the bills pile up and that horse is still crippled, what then? All these people," he gestured broadly at the gathered neighbors, "they'll move on to the next feel-good story and you'll be left holding a burden you can't afford to keep." Maybe Rosa's voice came from the diner's back door, where she stood with her arms crossed, her small frame somehow commanding in its stillness. Or maybe we'll prove that some things have value beyond their utility. That worth isn't measured only in what you can get out of something, but in what you're willing to give to it. She stepped down into the alley, moving to stand beside her son. "You tried to frighten us the other night with your threats and your money. But you made a mistake, Donovan. You assumed we were alone. You assumed no one would care about one broken horse and a family trying to do the right thing." Griffith's expression shifted to something uglier, the pleasant mask slipping. "Be careful, Rosa. You're making this personal when it doesn't need to be. I came here to offer a reasonable solution." Rosa smiled, but it was sharp as glass. "No, you came here to reassert control. To remind everyone that you're the powerful one, that you can crush anyone who defies you. But here's what you didn't count on." She gestured at the crowd, which had grown larger as people sensed confrontation and emerged from nearby buildings. "These people know what you are. They've watched you for years, buying up property, pushing out small businesses, treating this town like your personal kingdom. They've been too afraid to say anything because individually you could destroy them. But together," she let the word hang in the air, "together we're less afraid." The silence that followed was electric, charged with tension. Liam could see Griffith's hands clenching and unclenching, could see the fury building behind his carefully controlled expression. When he spoke again, his voice was soft and dangerous. "You're going to regret this, all of you. I don't make idle threats. By the end of the month, we'll see how brave you all feel when the consequences of this little rebellion start hitting home." He turned his attention back to Liam. "Last chance, son. $5,000. Final offer. Walk away from this now and we all move on. No hard feelings." Liam looked at Pepper, standing in her crooked stance at the far end of the corral. He thought about the way her eyes had looked in the auction ring, desperate and defiant. He thought about the tiny moments of trust she'd begun to show, the way she'd let Mateo get close, the way she'd touched his hand through the fence. He thought about Ava's sketches and Vicente's quiet faith and his mother's fierce defense. Then he looked back at Griffith and shook his head. "She's not for sale. Not for 5,000. Not for any amount. You can threaten us all you want, but you can't make me give her back." Griffith stared at him for a long moment, and Liam could see the exact instant when the man's pretense of civility shattered completely. "Fine," he said, biting off the word. "Have it your way. But don't come crying to me when this all falls apart." He strode back to his Range Rover, the crowd parting silently to let him through. The engine roared to life with aggressive power, and he reversed out of the alley fast enough to spray gravel. The silence he left behind was heavy, weighted with the implications of what had just happened. Then Mrs. Chun started clapping. Just a slow, steady rhythm at first, but others joined in, and within seconds the entire crowd was applauding. People came forward to shake Liam's hand, to clap him on the shoulder, to promise their support. The Kowalski brothers pledged to help with any construction projects needed for Pepper's care. Reverend Paul offered to organize a fundraiser through the church. Mrs. Patterson promised to spread the word among her extensive network of friends and family across the county. The outpouring of solidarity was overwhelming, humbling, and terrifying all at once. As the crowd eventually dispersed, drifting back to their homes and businesses with promises to check back soon, Liam found himself alone at the fence with Ava. "That got intense," she said mildly. "You sure you know what you've started?" Liam shook his head. "No, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just trying to do the right thing, and hoping it's enough." Ava was quiet for a moment, then she pulled out her notebook again, flipping to a fresh page. "Then let's make sure Hope has some solid ground to stand on. Tell me everything you've observed about how Pepper moves, what positions seem to cause her the most discomfort, when she's most willing to bear weight on those back legs." They stood there as the sun set, Liam describing in detail every movement he'd watched Pepper make over the past 3 days, and Ava taking meticulous notes. It was practical, concrete work, the kind of problem-solving that had clear parameters and achievable goals. After the emotional intensity of the confrontation with Griffith, the normalcy of it felt like a lifeline. By the time Ava left with promises to return in the morning, full night had fallen and the temperature had dropped enough that Liam could see his breath in small clouds. He climbed into the corral, moving slowly so as not to startle Pepper. The mare watched him approach but didn't retreat, a small victory that felt enormous. He sat down in the dirt a few feet from where she stood, not trying to touch her, just sharing the space. Above them, stars were beginning to emerge, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Liam tilted his head back and looked at them, trying to find some sense of perspective. 3 days ago, his biggest worry had been saving enough money for the mechanic shop. Now he'd made an enemy of the most powerful man in the county, turned his family's diner into the center of a small-town drama, and committed himself to caring for an animal most people considered beyond help. "You'd better be worth it," he said to Pepper, though his tone was gentle. "Because we've gone all in on you now. There's no backing out." The mare shifted her weight, and Liam heard the soft scrape of her misshapen hooves against the ground. Then she did something she'd never done before. She took 3 halting steps toward him and lowered her head until her muzzle was inches from his shoulder. He froze, barely breathing, as she exhaled a long breath that ruffled his hair. It wasn't much, just a moment of voluntary closeness, but it felt like a promise. Like she was saying, "I see you trying. I'll try too." Liam reached up slowly and let his hand rest against her neck. She tensed but didn't pull away. They stayed like that for several minutes, boy and horse in the gathering darkness, both of them damaged in ways that didn't show on the surface, both of them hoping that broken things could still have purpose. From the diner window above, Rosa watched her son with his impossible horse, and she thought about her father's words. "Sometimes the foolish choice is the only one we can live with afterward." She hoped desperately that he was right. The night deepened and the stars grew brighter, ancient light traveling unfathomable distances to illuminate this small corner of Montana, this modest corral behind a struggling diner, this fragile beginning of something that might be redemption or might be ruin. Only time would tell which, and time, Liam was learning, moved both too fast and too slow when everything you cared about hung in the balance. He finally stood, his legs stiff from sitting, and gave Pepper one last gentle pat before climbing out of the corral. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of his commitment. But tonight he had this small victory, this moment of connection, and for now that was enough. Inside the diner, the family gathered around the kitchen table for a late dinner of leftovers from the day's service. Mateo chattered excitedly about all the people who had come to see Pepper, about the compliments he'd received for his caretaking, About the girl from his class whose parents had stopped by and said maybe they could volunteer to help. Vicente ate slowly, his weathered face thoughtful. Rosa picked at her food, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Liam sat quietly, his phone face down on the table, resisting the urge to check the post's growing numbers. "We need to talk about next steps," Rosa said finally, setting down her fork. "This attention is good, but attention doesn't pay bills. We need a sustainable plan, something beyond hoping people's goodwill translates into actual support." Liam nodded. "Ava's going to work on custom shoes, try to make Pepper more comfortable. That's a start." "A start to what?" Rosa pressed, not unkindly. "What's the end goal here, Mijo? What does success look like?" The question hung in the air, and Liam realized he didn't have a good answer. He'd been so focused on saving Pepper, on defying Griffith, on managing each immediate crisis, that he hadn't thought about the bigger picture. Vicente spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "In the old days, horses had many purposes beyond riding. They pulled carts, turned mills, provided companionship for other animals. Perhaps Pepper's purpose is not something traditional. Perhaps it is something we have not yet imagined." The words sparked an idea in Liam's mind, still formless and vague, but present. What if Pepper's value wasn't in what she could do, but in what she represented? What if her purpose was exactly this, being living proof that worth extended beyond utility, that the broken and discarded deserved dignity? It sounded naive even in his own head, too idealistic to build a sustainable plan around. But before he could voice any of this, his phone buzzed against the table. He flipped it over to see a text from a number he didn't recognize. The message was simple and chilling. "You should have taken the money. Now you'll learn the hard way why people don't cross me." Liam's blood ran cold. He showed the message to his mother and grandfather, watching their expressions shift from concern to something harder. "That's a direct threat," Rosa said quietly. "We could show this to the sheriff." Vicente shook his head. "Griffith is too smart to send something that could be traced back to him directly. This is from a burner phone or someone he paid to send it. We have no proof it came from him." "Then what do we do?" Mateo asked, his earlier excitement replaced by fear. "Do we give Pepper back? Do we have to?" Liam looked at his little brother's face, saw the hope and worry warring there, and felt something crystallize inside him. "No," he said firmly. "We don't give her back. We document everything. Every threat, every suspicious incident, every attempt at intimidation. We make it all public. Griffith's power comes from operating in the shadows, from people being too afraid to speak up. So we shine light on everything. We make it impossible for him to hurt us without the whole county knowing exactly who's responsible." Rosa met his eyes and nodded slowly. "It's risky. It might make things worse before they get better." "I know," Liam said, "but we're already committed. We took a stand in front of half the town today. We can't back down now without losing everything anyway. Our credibility, our self-respect, maybe the diner's reputation. At least this way we're fighting back instead of just waiting to be crushed." The family sat in silence, the weight of the decision settling over them like a physical presence. Finally, Vicente raised his water glass in a small toast. "Then we fight, and we trust that truth and community are stronger than one man's cruelty." They clinked their glasses together, a gesture of solidarity that felt both brave and foolish, and finished their meal in contemplative quiet. That night, Liam lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing too fast for sleep. He thought about the text message, about Griffith's barely contained rage, about all the ways a powerful man could destroy a family that depended on the goodwill of a small town. He thought about Pepper standing alone in the corral, depending on him to protect her from the same man who had discarded her in the first place. The responsibility felt crushing, but underneath the fear was something else. A stubborn determination that had roots deeper than logic, deeper than self-preservation. He had looked into Pepper's eyes and made a promise, and promises, his grandfather had taught him, were sacred things. Outside his window, the Montana night was vast and dark, punctuated by stars that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, that would continue burning long after Liam and Griffith and everyone in Ridgewood were dust. The perspective should have made his problems feel small and insignificant. Instead, it made him feel connected to something larger, to every person throughout history who had chosen to stand against injustice even when standing was dangerous. He wasn't naive enough to think he was a hero in some grand story. He was just a kid trying to save a horse. But maybe, he thought, as sleep finally began to pull at the edges of his consciousness. Maybe that was enough. Maybe small acts of defiance mattered just as much as grand gestures. Maybe the accumulation of individual choices to do right despite the cost was how the world changed, slowly and imperfectly, one stubborn decision at a time. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonable cold, a reminder that Montana weather cared nothing for human calendars or comfort. Frost coated the corral fence in delicate crystals that caught the early light like scattered diamonds. Liam found Pepper standing in the lean-to, her breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. She had finally laid down at some point during the night. He could see the impression in the straw bedding Mateo had spread yesterday. But she was on her feet now, watching him approach with those dark eyes that seemed to hold entire conversations. He'd brought her breakfast, a coffee can full of grain mixed with molasses that Vicente had prepared, along with fresh hay that still smelled of summer fields despite the autumn chill. Pepper's nostrils flared as she caught the scent, her ears swiveling forward with interest. She took 3 careful steps toward the fence, her gait still heartbreaking to watch but perhaps slightly less labored than it had been at the auction. Maybe it was wishful thinking, maybe it was the fact that she wasn't starving anymore. But Liam thought he could see subtle improvements in how she carried herself. He climbed into the corral and set the grain bucket on the ground, stepping back to give her space. Pepper approached cautiously, testing each step as if the ground might betray her. When she reached the bucket, she didn't dive in immediately like a normal horse might. Instead, she took small, measured bites, her ears constantly swiveling to track Liam's position, ready to abandon the food if he made any threatening moves. The wariness cut at him, this reminder that trust was still a fragile, conditional thing between them. Ava Brennan arrived just as Liam was refilling the water trough, her truck rattling into the alley with the sound of loose parts and an engine that had seen better decades. She emerged carrying a weathered toolbox and a canvas bag that clinked with metal implements. Her breath steamed in the cold air as she surveyed the corral with a professional eye. "Going to need better light than this," she announced without preamble. "And we should bring her into an enclosed space. The diner have a back room or storage area we could use." Rosa, who had been watching from the kitchen window, opened the back door. "There's the old storage shed attached to the building. We stopped using it years ago when the roof started leaking, but it's dry enough and there's electricity." Ava nodded, already moving toward the shed to inspect it. Within 20 minutes, she had transformed the dusty, cobweb-filled space into a makeshift examination area. She swept the floor clear, set up 2 standing work lights she'd brought from her truck, and arranged her tools on an overturned crate with the precision of a surgeon preparing an operating theater. "Now comes the hard part," she said, looking at Liam. "We need to get her in here without traumatizing her. Based on her history with Griffith, she probably associates enclosed spaces with bad things. We're going to have to take our time, make it her choice to come inside." Liam thought about the auction barn, about loading her into the trailer, about all the ways Pepper had been forced into situations against her will. "How do we make it her choice?" he asked. Ava smiled slightly. "We make this space more appealing than the alternative. Food, warmth, your presence as something familiar. And we let her investigate on her own terms." She pulled a small bag of horse treats from her pocket, broke one in half, and handed the pieces to Liam. "Start by leading her near the door. Let her smell inside. Don't pull, don't force. Just be patient." Patience, Liam was learning, was both simpler and harder than he'd imagined. Simple in concept, brutal in execution. He spent the next hour slowly, incrementally coaxing Pepper closer to the shed. She would take a few steps forward, then freeze, nostrils flaring as she tested the air for threats. Liam stood at the threshold, speaking softly, offering treats, retreating when she showed signs of stress. Mateo joined them before school, sitting just inside the shed and reading aloud from his current book, some fantasy novel about dragons and unlikely heroes. The familiar sound of the boy's voice seemed to ease something in Pepper, her rigid stance softening slightly. By the time Mateo had to leave for the school bus, Pepper had advanced close enough to stick her head through the shed doorway. Her eyes were wide, showing white around the edges, but she was investigating rather than fleeing. Ava, who had been sitting motionless on an overturned bucket, spoke without moving. "Good girl. You're doing so good." Her voice was pitched low and soothing, nothing like the sharp commands Liam imagined Griffith had used. "Take your time. Nobody's going to hurt you here." Another 30 minutes passed before Pepper finally stepped fully inside, drawn by the promise of grain Ava had placed in a bucket at the far end of the shed. The moment her hooves crossed the threshold, Liam felt his heart hammer with a mixture of triumph and terror. If she panicked now, in this enclosed space, someone could get seriously hurt. But Pepper didn't panic. She stood very still, processing this new environment, then carefully walked to the grain bucket and began to eat. Ava rose slowly and moved to close the shed door, but not all the way. She left it ajar, a visible escape route that told Pepper she wasn't trapped. "Smart," Liam murmured. Ava shrugged. "Horses are prey animals. They need to know they have options. Trap them completely and even the gentlest one will fight." She approached Pepper from the side, moving with deliberate slowness, her hands visible and empty. "All right, sweet girl," she said softly. "Let's see what we're working with." What followed was a masterclass in patient handling. Ava ran her hands down Pepper's legs with careful thoroughness, murmuring constant reassurance, pausing whenever the mare tensed. She examined each hoof, noting the overgrown edges and cracks with small sounds of disapproval. She pressed gently on Pepper's stifles and hocks, watching for pain responses, cataloging every flinch and shift of weight. The entire process took over an hour, and by the end, both horse and human were sweating despite the cold. Ava stepped back and pulled out her notebook, sketching rapidly while the observations were fresh. "Her front hooves are actually in decent shape, just need standard trimming," she said, speaking as much to herself as to Liam. "But the back ones, they're bearing weight at completely wrong angles. See how the outside edge is wearing down faster than the inside. She's compensating, trying to find a stance that doesn't hurt. We need to balance that, redistribute the pressure points." She flipped to a new page and began drawing what looked like engineering schematics, shoes with unusual curves and extensions, measurement notations covering every margin. "I'm thinking a wedge pad on the inside edge," she muttered, extending the lateral support here, maybe a rolled toe to ease breakover. She looked up at Liam. "This is going to take multiple attempts. I'll make a test set, we'll see how she tolerates them, adjust based on her feedback. Could take weeks to get it right." "Weeks?" Liam repeated, thinking about his mother's 1-week deadline, which was now down to 3 days. "We don't have weeks. I have until Sunday to show improvement or—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Ava's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Then we'd better hope we get lucky on the first try. But I'm not going to rush this and risk making her worse. Your mother's deadline is about money and fear, I get that. But Pepper's welfare is about something bigger than deadlines. We do this right or we don't do it at all." The words stung because they were true. Liam had been so focused on the dramatic gestures, the public stands, the viral posts, that he'd lost sight of what actually mattered. Pepper's comfort. Pepper's quality of life. Whether she was in pain every moment of every day, and he was prolonging her suffering out of his own stubborn pride. The thought made him feel sick. What if Griffith was right, he said quietly. What if keeping her alive is selfish? What if the kind thing would be to let her go? Ava was silent for a long moment, studying Pepper, who had finished her grain and was now investigating a cobweb in the corner with apparent fascination. "You see how she's moving around, curious about her environment," she said finally. "You see how she ate every bit of that food. Those aren't the behaviors of an animal that's given up, that's suffering beyond endurance. She's uncomfortable, yes. Limited in what she can do, absolutely. But she's engaged with the world. That matters." She turned to face Liam directly. "I've had to put down horses I loved, because their quality of life was gone and keeping them alive would have been cruel. It's the worst part of this job, making that call. But I can tell you with professional certainty that Pepper isn't there. She's got fight in her still. The question isn't whether she wants to live, it's whether we're brave enough to help her live well. Liam felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of guilt and doubt he'd been carrying since the auction. Thank you, he said, his voice rough, for seeing her, for believing she's worth the effort. Ava gathered her tools, preparing to leave. I'll have a preliminary set of shoes ready by tomorrow. We'll do the first fitting and see what happens. In the meantime, she gestured at Pepper. Keep doing what you're doing. The handling, the routine, the trust building. That's the foundation everything else rests on. She paused at the door, looking back. And Liam, about your mother's deadline. Sometimes the people who love us set limits because they're scared, not because they don't believe. Give her reasons to be less scared. Show her the small victories, not just the big dramatic moments. After Ava left, Liam spent another hour in the shed with Pepper, just sitting quietly while she explored her temporary space. He thought about small victories, about the way she'd entered the shed voluntarily, about how she'd let Ava examine her without panicking. He pulled out his phone and took a short video, Pepper investigating a corner of the shed, her ears forward with curiosity rather than fear. He posted it with a simple caption. Day 4. She's learning this is a safe place. Progress isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a horse exploring a cobweb. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments poured in from people he'd never met, from across Montana and neighboring states, even from as far away as California and New York. The story had spread beyond Ridgewood, shared and reshared until Pepper had become something larger than just one horse. She'd become a symbol, a referendum on how society treated its most vulnerable members. The pressure of that symbolism weighed heavily on Liam. What if he failed? What if, despite everyone's support and Ava's expertise and his own desperate determination, Pepper's condition worsened? What if the story everyone wanted to have a happy ending instead became a cautionary tale about the limits of love? He was still spiraling into these dark thoughts when Vicente found him. The old man lowered himself onto a hay bale with a grunt, his cane propped against his knee. You are thinking too much, he observed. I can see it in your face, all the worry lines. Liam managed a weak smile. Hard not to think when everything feels like it's riding on what happens next. Vicente nodded slowly. I understand. But let me tell you something I learned from many years with horses. They do not care about deadlines or social media or what the town thinks. They care about this moment. Right now. Are they safe? Are they fed? Is the person near them a threat or a comfort? That is all. He gestured at Pepper, who had settled into a corner of the shed and appeared to be dozing. One hip cocked, her head lowered. She is not worried about Sunday. She is resting because for the first time in a long time, she feels secure enough to rest. That is victory, Mijo. Not the only victory you need, perhaps, but a real one nonetheless. The old man's words settled something in Liam, pulling him back from the edge of panic into the present moment. You're right, he said. I keep thinking about the end of the story when I should be focused on today. Vicente smiled. The end of the story writes itself based on how we handle each day. So handle today well. Feed her. Care for her. Show her kindness. Tomorrow do the same. That is how you build a life worth living, one day at a time. He stood with effort, using his cane for balance. Now come. Your mother needs help with the lunch prep, and I am too old to chop onions without crying like a baby. Liam followed his grandfather back to the diner, but he paused at the shed door to look back at Pepper one more time. She had opened her eyes and was watching him, and in the dim light of the shed, he could have sworn she looked peaceful. The lunch rush was brutal, every table full, the kitchen operating at maximum capacity. Rosa moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, calling orders, plating food, somehow keeping track of 6 different tickets simultaneously. Liam worked the grill, flipping burgers and pressing sandwiches, the familiar rhythm of the work providing a meditative counterpoint to the morning's intensity. Mateo burst in after school, still wearing his backpack, his face flushed with excitement. Liam, everyone at school is talking about Pepper, he announced, dropping his bag by the door. Mrs. Henderson wants to bring her class by for a field trip. And Tyler Morrison's dad said he'd donate hay for the whole winter if you needed it. The whole winter. Liam paused mid-flip, nearly dropping a burger. Seriously, the boy nodded enthusiastically. He said any horse that gets people talking about kindness deserves support. Also, can I go read to Pepper before I do my homework? She probably missed me today. Rosa, overhearing this, shook her head with a mixture of exasperation and fondness. Homework first, then the horse. And you, she pointed her spatula at Liam, have those burgers burning. He rescued the burgers and finished out the rush, his mind churning with this new information. Donated hay would solve one of his biggest ongoing expenses. If other people started contributing resources, if the community support translated into material help, maybe, just maybe, this could actually work long-term. As the afternoon stretched into evening, more offers came in through messages and comments. A local veterinarian offered discounted services. Someone from the feed store promised a standing discount on grain. The church fundraiser Reverend Paul had mentioned was being organized for the following weekend. Each offer was small individually, but collectively they represented something profound. A community deciding that Pepper mattered, that her life had value, that the fight to save her was worth joining. That night, as Liam did his final check on Pepper before bed, he found her lying down in the shed. Her body relaxed in a way he hadn't seen before. She lifted her head as he approached but didn't scramble to her feet, a sign of trust that made his throat tight. He sat down in the doorway, keeping his distance, and just watched her breathe. For days ago, she had been hours from slaughter. Now she was resting peacefully in a shed behind a diner, surrounded by people who cared whether she lived or died. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a complete transformation. She still had those twisted legs that would never be normal, still carried scars from whatever Griffith had done to break her spirit. But she was here, she was safe, and she was beginning to believe that maybe the worst was behind her. Liam pulled out his phone one more time and snapped a photo of her resting, her eyes half closed, her body language speaking of comfort rather than fear. He posted it without a caption, letting the image speak for itself. The stars were brilliant overhead as he walked back to his room, the Montana sky vast and indifferent to human struggles. But Liam didn't feel small beneath that immensity. He felt connected to something larger, to every act of compassion throughout history, every choice to stand against cruelty despite the cost. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Ava would arrive with the shoes, and they would discover whether innovation and determination could overcome anatomy. His mother's deadline crept closer with each passing hour. Griffith was surely planning his next move, his next attempt to reassert control. But tonight, Pepper was resting, and the community had shown that some things mattered more than money or power. Tonight was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.